everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Accommodation Show. This week, I am joined by a fantastic gentleman called Simon Sechusi or Simon Sechusi from a new company called SweetOp. Or is it SweetOps?
SweetOp.
Welcome, SweetOp. Welcome to the show, Simon. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Bart, for having me. Super happy to be here.
It's always nice to meet with people that are having great success in the industry, that have been learning from experience and building cool companies, building cool products to give back into that ecosystem and building cool businesses. This week, I'm really excited to talk to you about how you raised your $3 million recently, your journey to get there, and hopefully there'll be some insights that people can learn along the way that they can apply to their own entrepreneurial journey or into their own businesses and maybe even into their own lives. So I'm really glad to have you on, Simon. Could you start off by telling everyone a little bit about yourself and also about SweetOp and what it is that you guys do?
Absolutely. Thanks for such an elogious introduction, Bart. I haven't heard so many compliments thrown at me in such a short amount of time. I'm blushing already. So to tell you a bit about myself, so thank you for introducing me with the French accent as well. I am originally French. I've been in the United States for just almost 15 years now, and actually, after high school, lived all around from Southeast Asia, China, Shanghai, Beijing, and a few other spots. And that's definitely given me the bug of travel quite early and taught me that this was an industry I wanted to learn more about, an industry I potentially wanted to do a career in. Fortuitously, I think after school, I worked at a company called TravelClick, which is a very known, I think, company in the more traditional hotel space. Built a while back, went through a couple of renaissance and back then built a lot of software for the direct booking engine movement that was going on in the traditional hotel space. Ultimately, that led me to create SoSuite later on, which is a short-term rental brand based out of Philadelphia. And as we scaled that business with my co-founder and partner, Jean-Manuel, that was a much Frencher name than me, we ran into a lot of, I think, issues that many operators also run into when they scale. It's a simple fact that I think whenever you grow your portfolio, add units to your portfolio and grow your business, you also hire more people. And with more folks in your team, the increase in human capital also means an increase in the complexity of your operations. And as operators, we wanted to use the best tools out there to augment that human capital, make everybody more efficient, enable everybody to do a better job at serving our guests. And we tried a lot of great best of breeds tool out there and ultimately decided that we wanted to build something that would scale and that would be more interconnected, especially between guests and operations. And that's how SweetOp was born, out of our own challenges, growing our own property management company and eventually hitting a wall at, 400 listings and decided that enough was enough. So SweetOp was born out of that and has grown a lot to become what it is today.
Yeah, look, 400 properties is quite sizable anyway, right? Like over here in Australia, 400 is one of the biggest companies. I know that in the US, 400, if you go to one of the conferences, then 400 is small, and you get to 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000, then that's a lot larger. Is the property management side still running? And I'm really interested in something that you just said. You said we hit a wall. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you grow an operation in this space over a couple of years, you end up obviously building processes. You try and evolve with these processes as much as you can, but it's very easy to get stuck in processes that worked at 100 units and that may no longer work at 200 or 300. And those processes aren't just, notes on a document somewhere. They involve people that have developed habits. And so ultimately, when you scale, it's really crucial to look back at your operation and decide, okay, what we actually we may need to overhaul a lot of things that we're doing, rethink how our teams are structured, because what works at 50 units just simply doesn't work at 400. You have different needs. You need to scale differently. You start developing a concept of a headquarters and more local teams that are on site. And I think, we as we sort of had to develop these new ecosystems, these new operational paradigms, effectively, we realized that there weren't tools that helped us actually put those into motion. A lot of what was out, I think that what's both incredible in this industry, but also what became a challenge for us is how many new tools have emerged over the last decade. And that means a lot of tools are fairly new and they've evolved the way the industry has evolved. To your point, I think like 10 years ago, there weren't many 400, 500 unit property managers. There were more local ones. Now it's something we're seeing a lot more in the US, increasingly in Australia and that region. And so with more and more operators, there's an increasing need of different tools to serve those larger operators as well. And I think that's how we sort of got to that conclusion that we weren't being served necessarily by what was out there at that size, and needed something to jump over that wall.
Yeah, right. Okay. So then you're obviously looking at the different property management systems out there, the different solutions, and then kind of of course you'd be using them, and then at some stage you'd be saying, "Hey, we can start to develop our own thing." Before we go into that part, I'm really curious the timeline of, so you've got your job at TravelClick, was it? It's called
Yep,
TravelClick, right?
that's right.
And then you're doing the short-term rental stuff, you're building this business, you've got, at some point you get to the 400. When was the 400? And maybe give me an idea as to when that journey with the property management company started.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a real, you know, slow burn and hustle type of journey. When I started this business, I was just an Airbnb host in New York City. Was working for TravelClick, and that being an Airbnb host back in 2013, 2014 was still pretty new. People couldn't believe that folks would open their homes to other people. It was a pretty wild concept. Airbnb, I think, was making maybe like 60, $70 million of revenue then, so a pretty new company as well compared to what it is, the behemoth it's became. I started as a host because when I visited family back home in France, I would leave an empty apartment behind, and that just felt wrong. When you had tourists looking for more affordable accommodations that felt homey in New York City, at such an expensive town to travel to. So that's how it started. That's how sort of really the opportunity was identified. And then it continued in us purchasing a property, actually. And we decided to do it not in New York, but in Philadelphia. The reason we did that was because we wanted to enter a market that was already regulated. We had, I think, the ambition from the get-go of starting a company that could grow, and entering a market in which the regulation was a bit ambivalent and uncertain was not a risk we were willing to take. So we bought that home, and we bought it in Philly due to those more approachable regulations.
When was that? What year was this?
And that was in 2018.
Okay.
So back then I was working at TravelClick and bought it as an investment property with the aspiration of growing it into something bigger. And so that business grew to 20, 30, 40, 50 homes through several models. We initially started with a couple of master leases. After buying that first home, we quickly realized, okay, we bought a home, that's great, but we don't have any money to buy another one. So what do? We had no idea about how to raise some funds for real estate. So we started master leasing assets. We also didn't have a track record. We couldn't go to owners and say, look how much we've done with this particular asset, other than that one unit we had bought. So master leasing assets was a great way for us to build that track record. And we did that in 2019. About 6 months before COVID, we had the very fortunate realization that while master leasing was a great way to scale, it was also adding a lot of liabilities to our business.
Yeah.
And so we decided, at this point, that we had enough of a track record that people did start trusting us in this space, and that we could convince owners to not just lease their homes, but actually hand them over for us to manage on their behalf and share in the success and share in the revenue. That's how SoSuite, went from more of a master lease model to leaning a lot heavier towards a more traditional management model. That happened sort of right before COVID, grew throughout COVID, actually, where a lot of our competitors struggled. We had built an operations that was in-house, from housekeeping to maintenance and everything in between. And so we controlled cost a lot more, and that enabled us to scale throughout those tough times. And then ultimately the business grew pretty linearly over those 2-3 years until it hit about yeah, 400 or so doors about a year ago.
Yeah, it's fascinating that actually, when you talk about the master lease agreements, I take it that it works in the arbitrage model, right? That you're
Hmm.
basically,
That's
when
right.
you can master lease, you're talking about multiple properties in one building, and then the arbitrage model is sort of the same, but what you're doing is you're leasing someone else's property to then put it onto the short-term rental market, and a very controversial business model actually, especially now
Yeah.
with the cost of living stuff and housing shortages and that sort of thing. But interesting that around that COVID time, that so many people that were doing that particular model just got completely wiped out because they had just had so much risk, right? And what
Hmm.
was interesting through the story is something that hopefully everyone can learn a bit from, is understanding risk. And when you're building a business to scale a business, you're always taking risks every single day that you're in operations, but then mitigating them and understanding where your biggest risks are. And then your choice of, already back in the day, you understood that there could be risk. If you had scaled your business in New York, you would have been toast by now. But you said, hey, let's go to a place which is regulated. And there's laws that are in place. It enables us to scale. And then we've got certainty over building this particular business. I take it that that was kind of your thinking, and like really important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when building a business, I mean, you have to take risks. To your point, had we not started those master leases, we would have not built the track record we needed in order to start securing management agreements. So it was a necessary step in our growth.
Mm,
And one thing that worth mentioning here is that that master lease model is particularly popular in the traditional hotel space in some regions of the world,
sure.
particularly in like some parts of Western Europe and some parts of the Middle East as well. So it wasn't so much something that hadn't been done, but I think the US market particularly just didn't react so well to it. And that's, I think, because it's a market in which, and I think that goes to show also know your market and understand how a model that works in one geography may not work the same way in another. The US market in real estate bounces around a lot in a lot more agile way than others. What I mean by that is the cost per square foot, whether it's for rentals or for purchases, will evolve a lot faster than potentially other areas of the world. And so, the cost per square foot increased, that arbitrage, which I think is the right word to use here, shrinked shrunk over the years,
Yeah,
and that simply led to the model being less and less sustainable. And then obviously COVID as a catalyst, made that was a punch in
possible.
the gut that a lot of people
Yeah,
couldn't handle.
yeah.
And so with that being said, I think it's really important to take those risks while being aware that you're taking a risk in order to achieve a particular goal. And in our case, that goal was building a track record. And there may be other good reasons to take risks. It's just important to measure your ROI and make sure you have a clear idea of where you're going and why you're taking that risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Look, some good lessons there. And so, right now you're at 400 properties. So 400 properties across the 7 years. So 2018 for when that kind of that inception point, and now it's 400. Are you still in charge of that business? Are you still running that particular part, or is it being sold off? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, we're very fortunate in that throughout those years of building the business, we grew an incredible team, and we were able to, um, you know, the team was able to grow on their own. We were able to also give more responsibilities to people in the team, hire out fantastic individuals as well on the more executive level. And actually, we had our COO stepped in into a CEO role fairly recently. Our director of finance and accounting joined the team. The revenue management team is really self-sufficient as well. And so I think we've been able to completely offload that business to a frankly much more competent team as well than I think we were, to be able to continue make it grow. And that's something that we really was important to us as well, because as I mentioned earlier, our teams were in-house. And what that means is everyone from housekeeping to maintenance is an employee. And when you have 50 to 70 people that rely on you for their paycheck and in many ways their livelihoods, that's not something we were willing to shut down.
Yeah,
So
sure.
it was also, I mean, in full transparency, it was also an incredible, I think, secret weapon for us to be able to have a property management company that we could test new features on without as much repercussion, right? If the feature doesn't work, we're not losing a client. We're just getting a Slack message from someone saying, this doesn't work, let's fix it.
Yeah.
So having that proximity was extremely helpful.
It's interesting. There's quite a number of larger property management companies that I've talked to that have their own in-house systems that they build. It might not be the full range of the different parts of the business. You're not going to go and build a whole accounting module. You're not going to replace Zero, for example. You're not going to replace Slack.
Right.
But sort of those day-to-day business operations, things that are very well understood by you in your business, and you need things to work in a certain way. You're not the only one doing it, and I know that I believe that Cassiola are also doing it. I know that Casago, I think, and companies I'm talking about, excuse me if I get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure that Casago also built their first versions, and then that became Track, I think, and then that was a journey there, and then you guys are doing it as well. So everyone's kind of their own secret sauce, and I think that there's a huge advantage of being able to work in your own business on a particular product. If we look at huge companies like Atlassian that have grown, if we look at Amazon as well, Amazon, all the AWS stuff was all their own. They were using it for their own purposes, and now you guys have done the same thing. You're like, hey, we've developed this tool which is our own, but now we want to make it into a product. Can you tell me a little bit about that journey and that transition from the tool to the product?
Yeah. So it was a clear ambition from the beginning. I think as soon as we decided, let's build some internal technology, the goal wasn't let's just build an internal product to make SoSuite's operation better, but it was clear that we weren't the only ones with that problem in the industry, and we weren't the only ones hitting that metaphorical wall that we highlighted earlier. And so we always built it with the intent of let's build something that's going to be used by other operators that are facing similar challenges. I think that like build versus buy debate is an interesting one. I think that like someone who feels confident, especially with today's newer tools, whether it's lower code or AI assisted coding, should experiment with building things that may help them get to the next stage. I think that that's something I would encourage operators, frankly, of all sizes. However, folks need to be aware that technology, even with today's tool that allow you to prototype more rapidly, is something that you still need to maintain, that you want it to evolve, you want it to change with your business to stay up to latest trends. And that's something that has a cost. And so for us, when we started SweetOp, SoSuite was very much the guinea pig. It was our sounding board, proven ground, and it was an amazing way to be able to test immediately a new product with a fairly, call it medium to large scale operation, and knowing that, okay, if this works at 400, it should work at 4,000, and therefore it'll also work really well at 50. And I think that was our intent from the beginning. I think what was also something we realized quite early on, and the reasons we embarked on this adventure, is that that's our background. I started in the digital product world, building products for hotels, enabling them to get more direct bookings. And my co-founder is a very technical person who is a developer. And so in many ways, building this was returning to our roots and to what we felt we could do best. As I said, I think we also wanted to put SoSuite into a much more competent hands. And it was, I think, the realization of our own limitations as operators, and that our strength would be better placed in building software than in continuing to try and scale SoSuite the way we had done so far.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because especially those initial stages where you're building a new product, it's very, very expensive to do, and people don't really realize it. If you've got an office and if you've got developers and you got to pay them, and you got to pay them a lot of money, and the amount of time that it takes to build a new feature and make sure that it's working and tested, and then go out to put the product out and see if it's still working.
Yeah.
It's incredibly expensive, right? I assume that's what you guys did, is that you were using that business, you're building a product for that business to bankroll it, to make sure that it gets to a stage, then you kind of pull it out and then start its own journey as its own company. That's the journey, right?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to make it a sustainable business from the get-go. I think that was a measured risk that we sort of had taken into account. We didn't want to impact negatively SoSuite's P&L. And so when we actually built SweetOp, the first tool that we built was to try and replace something that we were paying off the shelf that was costing us, back then $15 a month per property. And so we're like, okay, let's first build an MVP that can replace that tool. And that took us about 4 to 6 months to build and launch. So to your point, it did sort of require an upfront investment in both time and money. Thankfully, we were able to do it initially ourselves without hiring things out. But as soon as we were able to replace that product, effectively, we sort of had paid back that initial investment in time and funds. And from there, SweetOp became its own thing, and we decided to build it as its own standalone company because it just made more sense that way.
I guess the trick is to not get carried away and build with too many ideas and, and build too many different products. I'm sure that you guys have had different ideas. Now we're running through time very quickly. Now I need to talk to you about the $3 million. So we've talked about the journey, how the product kind of came to be, and why it came to be. Then we've talked about becoming its own company, and then sort of pulling it out, SoSuite, and or maybe it started off in that path and that journey. From a capital perspective, I would imagine that for you guys, it wouldn't be beyond the realm of imagination to borrow some money from someone or get some money from the bank, basically, and start to build out that product, and you'd be almost advanced enough to start to be able to onboard customers and get money from your clients rather than going out to market to raise that 3 million. Tell me about that thinking, that journey towards saying, hey, actually let's raise some money for this.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first year of SweetOp's life cycle attempted as much as possible to get a couple of early beta clients, because we knew that having SoSuite as the only client would be valuable, but would have its limits. I think what's so special about this industry at the end of the day is that every operation is different, and we wanted to build a tool that wouldn't just work for SoSuite, but a tool that would work for other operators in the space, and that would be flexible to work for those other operators. So that's very much the backbone of how the tool was built. And so we very early on secured a couple of early customers that believed in the vision, that believed in the early version of the product. That enabled us to grow our revenue significantly enough that we could start hiring some great team members. And initially, I think to your point, we didn't need to raise capital to survive. We didn't have a date by which the company would miss funds and not be able to meet payroll. So we didn't have a particular high burn, I think is really the term that people tend to use. But we also had really big ambitions, and we wanted to grow the company and be able to offer it to as many operators as we can, because our first 20 customers are still our 20 customers to this day. We haven't really experienced any churn. And that was enough validation for us that this was a big enough problem and a big enough ocean for us to tackle. And it was worth taking a much bigger swing at the opportunity than just, growing it in a very, very slower and potentially more sustainable manner. So that's when we started exploring the idea of raising capital. And we had initially a couple of early feeler conversation to understand a little bit the venture capital market. And that was, back in September of last year of 2024. Those conversations told us a couple of interesting things. The first one is that to raise capital, cold outreach isn't the way. You really want to build relationships with folks, other founders that have received investments from investors that you are interested in connecting with. Build relationships with those investors directly, not to raise capital, but to learn about their funds, to tell them about what you're building, and as much as possible, get warm introductions. I think these go much further than just trying to cold email people. The second thing that it taught us is choosing the right partner.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you there.
Yeah,
Don't
please.
forget the partner part. But I take it that as part of your strategy, you did try cold outreach.
Yeah, we sent basically emails to a few folks that we had found that we thought could be good fits based on our online research, and we had some really good early conversations. But when you do cold outreach, you're just starting from that much further out than when you get a warm introduction from someone else.
Takes a while to build that relationship and the trust.
it takes a while to build a relationship. Ultimately, what an investor wants to see is traction, right? They want to see good signs that people are using your product, that ideally you're generating some early revenue, and that there is a path to growth. And those signals are hard to see if all they get is an email and a deck and one initial conversation with someone that they've never met before, that hasn't really been vetted as part of their network either. So that's why, we actually decided to pause things and to continue go back to building. And then quite serendipitously, I think later in the year, potentially as a result of some of those early conversations we had as well, but we actually had investors start to email us. I think we had, built a good online presence with the tool. We had a couple of good logos, good property managers using us. And that combined with a couple of solid introductions is actually how we ended up closing our round extremely quickly. So very interestingly enough, the tables truly turned in a matter of a couple of months there. It also gave us the time to refine the product and to continue building on our traction, so that when we jumped into those conversations, I think we had a much better sense of where we were headed.
When I interrupted you, I said you was going to say partners, so you're going to say the warm introductions and partners. I don't know if you've kind of covered it off in that answer, or whether there was actually a little bit more that you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think investors are going to be part of your company in some way or another. Now, some investors may be more active than others, and in most investors will let you build and will just want reporting, but that still means that they're part of your company. You're adding accountability to folks that are no longer just your team and your co-founders and your customers. And that's something that folks need to be aware about when they raise, because choosing the right investor is really crucial, and ensuring that you're aligned with those folks from the get-go. Whether that means choosing an investor for whom a $5 billion exit is good and anything below is considered a failure. Many investors will have those optics. Others are looking to build slower burn sustainable business that build on cash flow. And then others will be very happy with a $500 million acquisition, for example. I mean, I'm just sharing, various scenarios there, but I think depending on what your goals are, finding investors that are open to various scenarios and are willing to support you to get there is extremely important to establish as a baseline. Now, obviously, everybody wants to build the greatest company out there, and most entrepreneurs want to build the next unicorn, but still, having honest conversations with those investors and considering them as more than investors, but as true partners in your growth is definitely, I think, something we've learned.
Big one. Wow, that's so amazing. I love that story. I love the journey. I love the fact that you are kind of aware enough to go out and start pitching, and then go, oh, you know what, we'll go back to doing our product, and then it kind of comes back to you. So a serendipity, right, is kind of for it. How did you fundraise? Well, we kind of got lucky, but through action, right? And that was the whole thing, that you guys were taking action throughout it. I just want to rewind just quickly, because we are running out of time, into the part of you doing those first few meetings with kind of some warm contacts and leads, and having some chats with them. Did you have a full pitch deck sort of ready for them? Were you going in and sort of like pitching to them? Or was it a bit less formal? You're having a beer with them, chatting with them after a conference or after something, and then just kind of giving your ideas, and they ask you, like a Shark Tank sort of style interview. What did you have prepared when you were doing that particular part?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say over prepare and be ready for any scenario, because investors like to approach things differently. So we had a deck. We had put together what's called a data room, right? A list of data points on our traction and how things were going. But conversations may actually skip over the deck entirely and ask you to talk about your traction and some numbers. And some investors are going to be extremely quantitative focused. Sometimes you'll find that within one investor, you're going to have multiple partners or multiple members of the investment committee or investment team that each are going to have also very different focus and personalities. I think those are things that also are really important to be aware of. Who you're going to be talking to at a particular investor. Is it someone who has a tech background? Is it someone who's more of a go-to-market person? That'll help guide what you should be ready to pitch, whether it's talking about your technology or talking about your customers. So I think that that's an important learning point as well. Be prepared for anything and study who you're going to be speaking with in order to be able to share the relevant information.
Okay, what a journey. What a story. I feel that there's a lot more to come. I'm really excited to see your growth and your journey. Do you reckon you've got the 3 million now, which wasn't too long ago? Are you guys already looking at the next 10?
I think we're looking at it as having bought us an ability to hit the gas and optionality. So we now have the ability to take more risks and experiment and move faster. At the end of the day, that's what money is for. When you're getting the funding, I don't think it should be exclusively seen as let's do this. So we reach that next milestone so that we raise the next bigger round. I think the way we're looking at it is this is giving us options and it's giving us freedom to be able to do a lot more and do things that we had to potentially avoid or approach a lot more carefully in the past. Money allows you to take more risks and it allows you to take a bigger swing at things. So right now we have very ambitious goals for our growth. We'll see whether that means raising another round or growing in other ways.
I thought you were going to dodge the question, but almost. But I get it. That's good. And look, exciting times ahead for you folks. And one thing that I do know, when we do raise money, be it 1 million or 3 million, that money can disappear very quickly, depending on what you're trying to do, and it gives you a lot more ability to move. But also that comes with its own problems because everything gets more expensive as you spend more money on it. It's a weird one. But look, Simon, thank you so much for coming in and having a bit of a chat with us about your journey. I'm really excited to see where SweetOp goes, what it looks like, folks. If you're interested in having a look at what they're doing or connecting with Simon, what's the best way to reach out to you guys?
Feel free to reach out to me on my direct email, simon@sweetop.com, whether it's to talk shop and get insights on how to grow a property management business because you've hit a wall, or just because you want to talk shop and talk about the industry. It's always happy to connect.
Beautiful. And I take it you're on LinkedIn as well?
Absolutely, yeah. SweetOp or Simon Sechusi. And if you want to maybe talk about technology, my co-founder Jean-Manuel Ozi is always happy to dive into things there as well.
That's a phone call or a contact that I will be making, Simon, because we have some needs that we have on our end. And I think that this is it, right? It's all about working together and building those connections and partnerships. Look, folks, if you are tuned into the podcast on Spotify or on iTunes, then give us a review. A 5-star will be terrific. It enables us to keep on doing this, to bring these amazing people through to the podcast. It makes it more exciting for them to come on and talk about their journeys and their stories. And the thing that I love about what Simon's done is he's actually given like the real story and the real background as to how they did it. So thank you very much. If you're watching on YouTube, just here somewhere there's a subscribe button. Hit the subscribe button. It makes a huge difference. We're trying to get into the multiple thousands of subscribers, which will once again show everybody else on the internet that this is something they should be watching. Simon, thank you so much. I wish you a really good rest of the day, and I'm sure we'll connect again really soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Bart. It was great to connect today.
Take care.